Ready, Bob?
Yep.
Big enough space that, I don't know that we can come down enough. Do it.
Good evening. We're going to call this work session into session. That didn't come out that well. So this is the City Council work session for December 13th at 5 o'clock. And we will continue to proceed with the call to order.
A roll call.
Roll call. I'm off
Council-
my game tonight.
Councilmember Gettle,
Present.
Councilmember Learman, Councilmember Manfredi, Councilmember Marsh,
Here.
Councilmember Wade, Vice Mayor Vidiello, Mayor Smith.
Here.
Madam Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, so that'll move us to the one and only agenda item, which is 3.1 WS 22-02. The mayor and city council shall hear the proposed changes to the temporary sign code. And this will be a presentation by Wes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Wes Moss. I'm with the City of Maricopa, Code Enforcement Supervisor, and I'm going to be presenting the proposed changes to the temporary sign code and the memorial markers. And with these changes, these changes are still similar to the previous code. We just have to make clarifications. That way, the average citizen that doesn't look at the code every single day is able to interpret that and understand it. We do have to stay within the guidelines of the recent case law with Reed versus Gilbert. Some of these changes include combining some of the tables within the temporary sign code and clarification on residential use in residential zones and what a residential use is. And if we can bring up the proposed sign code, is it? This is the, I need the PDF.
Oh, you want the PDF?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the first part of this is defining what residential use is and what non-residential use is. In determining this, we've taken account what every residence has in their everyday use of their property, and then we're separating it into non-residential use, which would be any type of business transaction or event that would take place on their property, whether it's an open house, a yard sale, something similar to that. And with that, the first, the residential use in residential zones, we kept it pretty similar with the addition of putting one temporary sign within 5 feet of the setback, and then up to 4 signs within 5 feet of the structure. What this is doing is we're not wanting to infringe on yard decorations, and unfortunately some of these yard decorations, whether they say welcome or some other symbol, we have to read them as signs because we can no longer read content. So with this, the first part of that is allowing for essentially for sale signs or for lease signs on the property, but also allowing decorations towards the actual portion of the house. And if I can bounce back to the PowerPoint real quick, I'll kind of show you an example of what I'm talking about. So right here, even with the Ring doorbell sign, the welcome sign, technically by law, we have to view those as signage, not by choice, just unfortunately with the guidelines and not being able to determine if it's decoration or if it's for some sort of commercial use. And that's why we're allowing multiple signs towards the actual residence. The same with this. Technically, that would be 3 different signs on a residential property. We don't want to infringe on that. Again, right here, sports fans, welcome sign, all these are actual signage.
So Wes, just to be clear, one of the proposed changes is to go from 1 to 4 so that these type of situations would be allowed. Is that
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And if I can go back to the PDF.
So that was definitely one of my questions. So I just want to make sure I understand, temporary signs for residential use in residential zones. And in that, we're including open house, yard sales, and yard signs?
Those are examples, although we are not allowed to read the content of the sign, but it's intended for those purposes.
Okay, so an open house belongs in this category versus, okay, not an open house.
No, ma'am.
Okay, so scratch
no,
that
Mayor.
one. So yard signs, yard sales, yard signs.
Correct.
And they can have up to 4 if it has words on it, or even if it's a picture that's in their yard, that's considered a sign as well?
If it's depicting some sort of interpretation or message, correct.
Okay, so 4 of those visible on their own private property, 5 feet from,
Correct. And then we're allowing one sign 5 to 10 feet from the right-of-way on their property, and that would be for like a for sale sign or for lease sign, stuff of that nature.
say that one more time.
So between 5 and 10 feet
Yes,
off the right-of-way on their property or on private property, they can have one sign which is intended for sale signs or for lease, something of that nature.
So within the 5 to 10 foot setback, they're allowed 1 sign. Beyond that, on their own property, you're allowed up to 4 signs.
Correct.
And this is dealing with residential property, owned property by
Right,
itself, not
right.
addressing right-of-ways or other things that will come later in the presentation.
perfect. Other questions there? Bob?
Yes, there seems to be some confusion about the setback from the edge of the street. I would read it as being from the edge of the curb, but I understand enforcement is taking it from the edge of a sidewalk. What's the deal?
So the way we interpret, sorry, council member, the way we interpret it or attempt to explain it is setback from the street, but not all property lines go right to the curb or the street. There are some that actually overlap both private property and a residential street. And actually, I can show you a photo if I can go back to the PowerPoint real quick. Here's a case on Smith Inc. The actual right-of-way goes clear up to the back walls in that residential neighborhood, and it ranges anywhere from 20 feet to 35 feet, and that's just the way that they were parceled out. In this area off of Taft, we actually, minus the roadway, we do not have a right-of-way off the street. The private property actually overlaps, and that was due to right-of-way or
Well, this has nothing to do with the edge of the street. It has to do with the property lines. Is that what you're
correct. So
saying?
it's 5 to 10 feet from the right-of-way, from which most cases is from the edge of the street, in most cases, in most residential areas.
Madam Mayor and Council, that is our code, but we would like to probably establish just a flat back of curb, 5 feet or 8 feet, whatever is appropriate.
sense.
I agree.
Because otherwise, everyone's going to call us wanting us to come out there and do a survey and tell them where the line is. And that would be very staff intensive. So obviously, if it's a line of sight issue or something like that, we reserve those rights to move signs if it creates a hazard or a burden. But I think we'd like to recommend that back of curb, because back of curb or edge of road, not every road has a curb, not every road has a sidewalk, that would be minimum 5, between that 5 and 10 foot range.
That makes perfect sense. And then, so on that same table, the part that doesn't make sense is maximum spacing from any other sign, 10 feet. But this is on their own property. You're not suggesting that those 4 signs that are on their property are 10 feet apart? And they
No.
only get 1 sign on their property, so does this rule even apply in that
It
case?
applies within that 5 to 10 foot setback, but it doesn't apply beyond that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Josh?
But on their property, they can only have 1 sign, so
No.
they'll never run into this,
They can
right?
have one within that 5 to 10 foot setback off the edge of the road.
Right.
And then beyond that, on their own property, they can have up to 4 more.
Right, but what is this 10-foot minimum spacing from any other signs, 10 feet? What
That's
is-
within that 5 to 10 yard setback. So in that first zone, 5 to 10 feet beyond the edge of the road,
None of their 4 signs.
they can't
can-
be within 10 feet.
Thank you. None of their
But
other 4
beyond that-
signs. Okay, gotcha.
It
Well,
also
there-
applies
there are
to
also other
right-of-ways
types
and
of
other
signs.
setbacks, which we'll get to.
What was that?
There are other types of signs that could be used in that 5-foot zone, the non-residential, residential use.
Yeah, but-
Non-residential use in
That's
residence
different.
zones.
That's different, yeah. Just sticking with this one, residential use and
That
residential.
would have to be 10 feet away from the one that's residential use in residential zone.
Right, right. So basically, only 1 sign and none of the other 4 signs within 10 feet of that.
Did we say that right, Josh? Okay.
Hello, Josh Bowman, Emergency Manager. So, Mayor, Council, thanks for letting us present. So, a few things to note on the back of street. So, Councilmember Marsh, that was a problem with the code as it was. That proposal is that if you look at that wording in the residential and residential zoning is setback from street edge to try to clarify those things. Those pictures that we'll continue to go through show the difficulties in looking at it strictly from property lines and setbacks because this city as a whole has multiple different setbacks. Sometimes it's back of curb, sometimes as we showed in that picture, it can be all the way up to the back of a wall of residence. So we are proposing that it is from the street edge to try to clarify that. If you don't mind, I'd also like to step back. Each of these that we will go through, we'll go through 3 different tables. The goal of this is that they are designed around the zoning, which is one of the things we can regulate. So this is residential use, and keeping in mind, we're trying to understand this is someone's home. We're trying to let them have their home decor with us not imposing regulations on that. So the regulations for home decor, trying to be very lenient. We don't have a lot of input on that. Those that are out-facing, close to their property line, they're more of a marketing or trying to show to other people. We want to make sure that's where we're more restrictive on. If that clarifies things.
Perfect, thank you.
And if we can go back to the Word doc.
A Greek statue.
And the second page.
Excuse me, it might be a good idea to put some examples of the signage that's in that category under the box and under the table, like for sale signs, for lease signs, sports fan signs, yard sale signs.
Okay, I'll take that note.
I think that would help,
Okay.
because it made me ask the question.
Council, our zoning code, we will have just the code with the improvements, but I think we should prepare a public education piece that would be kind of the reader's version with the pictures there.
Yeah, that would be great.
Agreed.
And 18.115.120B, this table is going to be for non-residential use within a residential zone district. This is going to separate the home decor and the residential uses more into the businesses, anything that's there to make a profit, anything to conduct advertising, any directional signs to any events, organized events.
So this would be open houses for
Correct.
realtors?
Correct. So the first column, or the second column, general criteria, that's just the basics. Anything outside of that, it's subject to anything specified. So the general criteria is our baseline, and then unless it's specified otherwise. And with this, for the maximum number of signs per parcel, it's going to go down to asterisk 1 right below the table. This is going to allow open houses to have essentially 6 off-site signage on private property. This is also going to allow them to do that without a permit. Let's see.
So Wes, on this one, for minimum setback, again, I like the fact that you're using from street edge, that's good. The part that's somewhat confusing is must be on private property. Is that for the one sign? Or is that for all signs?
That's for all signs, Mayor.
Because if I'm thinking about leading somebody with these 6 signs off-site, are we then asking them to get permission from various homeowners along
Yes.
the way?
Yes. If you allow them on the right-of-way, you have to make a decision, it's all or nothing, under the Supreme Court ruling. So if you allow this sign, for instance, you have to allow KKK rally or anything else. You can't pick and choose. So yes, they do need to get permission. Now, some property owners may not care, may not say anything, but and we won't be removing them, correct me if I'm wrong, unless a property owner calls and files a complaint with us. So that's between them and the property owner. If the property owner complains, then we will take action. If they don't, we won't. Is that correct?
Correct. And it should be noted, the majority of these are within HOAs, and typically the HOAs do not have any reservations about having those signs on their property.
Okay, so private property could be the open space within the HOA?
Yes, Mayor.
Could be the corners where they have their monument signs, entry monument signs, any of those spaces. And again, as long as they don't prevent line of sight for traffic and those type of things, don't hide the fire hydrant, don't block a mailbox, those type of things.
So the A-frames that the realtors, I know there was a discussion about going up to 10. Our people spoke about the three of us, well, two of us, Henry and I, we had discussed that we wanted to go up to 10 signs. Because if you
Councilmember,
live,
can you pull your mic a little closer?
we were discussing going up, Henry and I were going up to 10 signs. Because if you live way back in Tortosa, 6 signs will never get you even halfway there. Some people said 20, and I said, no way. But 10 seemed to be a viable number to get you back to those areas. So,
Well, I was wondering, because I like this conversation, because I read a couple other perspectives on this particular element. Is there a way to write it so that you were allowed specifically, if you're having an event at your home or a open house, whatever the case might be, enough signs when there's a directional change? That makes sense to me. If there's, I mean, if I have a stretch from here to the end of the room, I don't want 5 signs. But when I get to the end of the room, I need to let people know I'm taking a right. So therefore, if there is a directional change, I feel like we should be allowing for signage up to what's needed to get them to the property. And it seems like there should be a way to word that so that we still have control over too many signs, but yet enough to get them to where they need to be. Just-
Council, your points are valid, but think about this. If you're coming into town to look at a house, because you're thinking about moving here, and you come down John Wayne, you got Smith Inc., and basically Smith Inc. Honeycutt, and that's it. Unless I'm missing one in there somewhere. So if you have 42 yard sales or 42 sales, and all of them want to put a sign on that intersection, how do you put 20 or 30 signs saying start here and go somewhere? That's the problem. That's why there has to be a minimum somehow, because if you pull in and then all of a sudden there's 20 or 30 and people say, well, that's never going to happen, but frankly it could. And you're pulling into town and, turn left on Smith Inc., and there's 30 signs from 30 different people, and then they've span out from there. So that's the issue you have to consider. Now, whether it's 6, 10, or not, that's really for you to give us direction on, and we'll comply with whatever you ask us to do.
How many signs does it take to get a car from 347 to Cartagena in Tortosa?
I think it depends on the driver.
well,
I mean,
an issue like that, going from 347 all the way to Tortosa, I don't think is the issue. I think it's the weaving in and out of
That's what I think.
left
as
side,
well.
yeah,
right.
and I
Because you'd
I
have to have
agree
50
once you get
signs.
to a nexus.
Yeah.
But some people don't even know where those streets are, I would presume. But I don't think I would have an issue with 10 signs, provided we don't have, this 20 or 30 signs on the same corner trying to direct people, because then they're going to stop and say, okay, which one is mine? And then they're holding up traffic, and that's our concern when it comes to that.
Wes, and Josh, we had spoke about they have to be 10 feet apart.
Correct.
Which again, we'll get into as we go down the line. So you won't have a cluster. Sure, you may have them down a line, but 10 feet apart from each other.
And 10
opposed to
feet
having-
apart would limit the number you could put on any intersection, but then you have, is it first come, first serve, or does someone pull up someone else's sign to put their sign? Not that that ever happens in politics or other things, but it does, so.
Remember, we're not talking about political signs. So, go ahead, Josh. Go ahead, Wes.
What other thoughts? I think this is an important issue. What other thoughts do you guys have?
I do support Nance, Mayor Smith, your comment about allowing enough signs to direct in, and having that be some type of a standard. And I believe that, Mr. Horst, your example of multiple signs on that corner could be alleviated by, again, that minimum distance requirement to help keep things a little bit under control. So I would like to also ask that we maybe consider that point of putting some type of verbiage in there that would allow enough directional change signs to get somebody to the property.
Okay. Mayor and council, other cities have proffered that you can have enough signage to get where you want to go, provided it's within a mile of the site and you don't expand, too far out. Is that something you might want to consider?
Well, yeah, when you were stating Smith Inc. and 347, I totally get your argument.
Yeah.
And I would say, let's try to avoid intersections like that. So if there's some better way to word it, so that the start is at a village or community entrance.
Within a mile of the home site. And even if you want to say whatever amount of signs is reasonable to direct people there within a mile, and of course, we can test that for a period of time and see how that works, and then you can make other amendments, but is that something that might be worth considering?
Thoughts?
Yes.
I'm thinking of some of our outlying communities. I mean, a mile is not too helpful in some of those cases. Is a mile too small of a
Typically,
radius?
and maybe we can get some answers from those in the audience when it comes time for them to speak, but because they certainly know this business better than we do. But typically, does someone, are they just driving around looking for signs, or are they looking for Tortosa or neighborhoods? So that input would be helpful when we
Yeah.
get to that point in the public conversation.
Okay,
And we
so-
don't, we're just laying it out, and final
Laying it out,
decisions
yeah.
will be later.
So let's
but-
put that kind of like on a parking lot and come back
Sure.
when we have some others speaking. And then my only other question was for clarification, which Vice Mayor Vidiello said. I have heard two interpretations of the 20 feet from other signs to be two different things. 20 feet from other people's signs versus 20 feet from your own additional signs. So could you clarify which it actually is?
Typically, so the way it's written is 20 feet from any other sign.
Any other sign?
Any other.
Okay.
And there's a few reasons for that, and again, we're here seeking also direction. Some of that is sign cluster, blight, but also distracted drivers. Some of these corners can get fairly busy, some of these intersections, and we don't always have the safest drivers as is on the roadway, but we are open for any feedback.
But Mr. Moss, if I can also ask a clarifying point on that, if that includes all other signs, does that also include the community monument signs that are, the villages or Tortosa? Would that 20 feet rule apply to that space as well?
That's more of the monument sign for the community.
Well, I think the intent is against any other temporary sign.
Yeah.
So not a
Does say
stop sign or
temporary
a street
or-
sign or any other permanent sign that would not be considered.
Temporary signs.
Yeah.
Mr. Horst, if I read that correctly, on that table, it does say temporary or permanent. That's what I'm asking the question for.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's my opinion that permanent probably shouldn't be there because, stop signs and U-turn signs and all those would limit quite significantly. The street signs are raised to elevation to meet our traffic code, and unless they're taping them to the sign, which is against the law, a sign on the ground shouldn't be a problem. But what do you think, Josh?
That's why we're here, for your guys' guidance. It is written as it was. If you would like us to remove the permanent, that's an easy thing to do. All of this some of these are changes, these are highlighted areas that we wanted to bring up to discuss, knowing that there had been discussion on some of these areas. So wherever the direction you'd like to give us, we're happy to make those changes, understanding that the sign code will go to planning and zoning for approval and then back to you for final approval after all of your comments are applied.
I'd recommend you consider just temporary signs, but we'll leave it to your discretion.
Yeah, I have some concerns with that word permanent.
I agree. Totally agree with that. I'd like to scratch that. I did notice in your subnote 1, on this particular table, you do have examples, so that's perfect.
Thank you.
What was your question?
Permanent.
I didn't bring up permits.
Permanent.
Permanent.
Permits.
Permanent.
Permanent.
And then going down to the second column in the bottom row, we did propose a change of sun up to sun down during the time the organization is open for inspection. This is for the purpose of signs not being left out past an event or placed multiple days prior.
So Wes, on that, they will have time before and after the inspection hours to get them up and down, though.
Absolutely. Our intent is not to.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. If I can shift down to the next page. In this table 18.115.120C, and this is for non-residential zoning districts.
And so just give me an idea, what does this relate to? What type of signs?
So this one. So this for non-residential districts, anything that's not a non-residential, anything that has some sort of business aspect to it, any retail, any commercial
a special
commercial
event.
zone. So. And in this one, in the first row, we're discussing the number of signs per parcel. Again, the general criteria is just that, anything that's not specifically mentioned. If we go over to these, and keep in mind, these are permitted signs that you need to apply for a permit for.
So Wes, just
yes.
for my own clarification, what we're going through now is for non-residential properties, so mostly commercial, industrial properties, correct?
Correct.
And these are the code for signs, but in these areas, a permit is required,
Correct.
with the exception of political signs?
With the
Correct.
exception of T-frames, according to this.
S-
I don't know what a T-frame is, but,
So it's one A-frame or T-frame sign. Typically, it's the sign that's put out in front of the business.
T-frame has
A-frame
a
and
s-
T-frame, I'm sorry, the copy wasn't very, so you don't need a permit for an A-frame and a T-frame.
Correct, one.
Or a political
One.
sign.
Or a yes, political signs do not need a permit.
What is a T-frame sign?
It's,
If you think of your poster sign with just one stake, that's basically what a T-frame sign is that right?
correct, it goes up and then tees off to actually hold the signage down, compared to an A-frame sign with two edges that meet at the top. Correct. So.
Okay, so on this one, where we say allowed on public sidewalks, only A-frame and no more than 1/3 of the width of the public sidewalks may be obstructed and must provide at least 5 feet of sidewalk clearance. Do we have sidewalks that big?
We may,
It
but
has to
this,
be 5 feet plus a sign that doesn't take up more than a third.
And this is also for future development, anything like
Okay.
that, private property.
Okay.
If we don't want to
right.
violate ADA.
But there are some sidewalks where signs won't work.
Correct, absolutely.
Most of our current sidewalks, the signs
Most
won't
of them,
work.
that's what I thought, okay.
Which again, we should actually put in there, it should be off the sidewalk. Somebody runs into it in an HOA, being an HOA board member, I want to disclose that. I don't want to have a lawsuit put against me or the city. It should be placed off to the side is where I think it should be.
So these are also placed on private property, and that's for the with that disclaimer for the ADA. But I will take that down as a note.
And just to clarify again, they cannot put it on public right-of-way sidewalks, period. But if it's a sidewalk within the Fry's Shopping Center, for instance, that wider walking area, that may be 10 or 15 feet wide,
Okay, that's,
they can put signage there, they just can't block the path of ADA access.
okay, but this does say public sidewalk.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Well,
worried about.
I don't know why it says that, Josh. Again, we can't, it's all or nothing, right, on our right-of-ways?
Correct.
So again, the wording as it was. It's happy to change this. Again, that's why we're here for direction. The concept that City Manager Horst said, and think of some of these shopping centers where you have like a Fry's that has a very large sidewalk and has multiple shops in front of it. The intent of this was that they could have an A-frame. This is on their property. They can have an A-frame that cannot block ADA accessibility, which has to still be that 5 feet of sidewalk clearance. But changing that word of public sidewalk is an easy fix, and if that's the direction, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, the intent is it's a private sidewalk for public use, if that makes sense, like Fry's Shopping Center. So we'll just find better verbiage to make sure we clarify the difference between the two.
So City Manager Horst, we currently do have A-frames on 347 on the sidewalks.
We shouldn't.
Okay.
Churches and stuff like that.
Well, the tax groups, I see them all the time out there.
Well, and the problem
Churches.
is, if the city allows it and we violate ADA rules,
Right.
we could be sued.
Right,
If someone gets hurt, or if a sign hides somebody, you know, who might be in a low-profile mobility vehicle or something on the sidewalk, we'd be liable. So we really just need to keep our sidewalks that we own and control, which is within the public right-of-way. It's the all or nothing, and we're recommending the nothing. But again, if it's a publicly used sidewalk, like in front of Bash's or the new Snoring Creek Shopping Center, or those places, you know, Sprouts can put signs out there, you know, figs, 2 barrels for $5 or whatever, as long as they don't block ADA access. Yes, on their, well, it depends on the agreement they have with whoever owns the shopping center. They may have the right to put it beyond their front of their store, but again, on privately held, publicly used access points.
Mr. Moss, one more clarification on, allowed on the currently written public sidewalk, we're changing that to private. Does it matter which 1/3 of that sidewalk is used for that sign? Does ADA have anything to say? Is it the street side or the parking lot side or the business side where that sign's allowed?
No, council member, as long as there's ADA access.
Okay. Thank you.
And to be clear, you can't have the signs like this where you don't have a 5-foot space. So you can do this down the sidewalk, but you gotta have a 5-foot clearance no matter which way you go. Say something wrong.
so does one permit, I see that on your note 1, they can have up to 4 signs per organization. Is that 4 separate permits, or is that all included in one permit?
That's all included in one permit.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
And that would be like a tire store wanting to have a tire sale and advertise it, or, you know.
And then we just go on to some clarification such as subsection 3, construction sites with contractor signage, allowing the contractors to be able to have a sign posted on a construction site on the perimeter fence.
How many?
Typically, it is one per contractor.
So for instance, if you're building a large building and the bricklayer has this sign and the architect has this sign and whatever has their signs, that's okay. They just can't have multiple signs.
State code says you have to have your
Right.
contractor, you have to have your sign listed.
Yeah.
Just to let you know.
And there has to be the SWIP permit sign and all those other things that are on there. So all those will be allowed, provided they don't, again, block line of sight and those type of things, like a access point to a driveway or whatever.
And are there any additional questions before I move down to memorials?
I don't see any.
Is everybody okay with the sun up and sun down requirements, especially for perhaps businesses that are open extended hours?
I don't have a problem with it.
Currently, it's sun up to sun down for temporary signs. Okay.
Did you have a thought, Councilmember Gettle?
Just thinking of, various businesses that may have extended hours, and especially in the wintertime, sun goes down quite early.
If I may, so the actual sun up to sun down is actually non-residential use in a residential zoning district. That would not apply to permitted temporary signs. Permitted temporary signs actually can stay up for the duration of the permit.
Perfect.
Okay.
Is there a requirement that the person responsible for posting the sign put their name and phone number on the signs? So they can be contacted when they get hijacked by enforcement?
We encourage it. We encourage all the signs to be have their information on it.
I think
We
it
do
should
hold
be-
the signs
I think
for.
it should be stated in the regulation.
Okay.
One of the problems we have, and frankly, they're not from our professional community. They're from the yard sale and others that do things that, they'll tape things up and put them up and then they'll not take them down. And and then it causes staff time and taxpayer money to go remove those. And frankly, these are the same people who probably would not put their name and address or phone number on them. Again, our professional people do a really good job. For one thing, use nice signs, and they don't want them thrown away. They want to take them down and use them again. But we'll take that under advisement, Councilman, and see what else we can do to encourage that. A lot of times they'll leave up a yard sale sign, and of course, we know how to get to their yard because of that. And we don't want to deface public property with peeling paint or blocking signage or stop signs or other things. And people say sometimes the best way to get their attention is put it right on the stop, because everyone's used to looking up there, and you think I'm kidding, but as we show you some of the pictures later, you'll see that we see it all, so.
I'd like to see an improvement, too, in the process for regaining possession of your sign after it's been taken by enforcement. I'd like to have a bin that's labeled in a clean, safe area where someone in business attire could safely go back and retrieve their signs and not have to go change into blue jeans to go get it.
Well, we're not going to take their sign if they abide by the code. And I think that's where it starts, public education and abiding by the code. And if we do take their sign, if we're going to call them or have a way for them to come pick them up, first they violate the code, and then we spend more taxpayer money to help them get their sign back that they violated the code with. We have to think that through a little bit.
I
Certainly.
think there are lots of reasons for violating the code when the code is confusing.
Well, but we're here today to help clean that up. That's what our process, and if we clean it up and educate our public correctly, it does take a lot of staff time to call people and say, hey, your sign's here, you want to come pick it up? And, if we're going to do that, then we ought to think about, okay, they need to pay a fee because is it fair for all of the taxpayers in the entire city to fund what a handful of people don't do right? That's would be my question.
City Manager Horst, I think there's maybe a couple board members I'd like to hear from them. I'm sure they're going to speak. I'd like to ask them that question in their particular area. Because I could speak for Cobblestone, so I'd like to hear from some of the other board members if they're in the
Well,
room.
let's come
Yeah,
back to
yeah,
that
that's
then.
what I'm
We'll
saying.
table that one for now. Put it in the parking lot, okay.
If I can move 3 pages ahead, it's going to be the last page to memorials. And here we'll be discussing memorials and some of the concerns that came up during the last council meeting. First off, our plan for this code is actually to remove it from temporary signs and place it into a different section. We did hear, I received 3 emails from the public after the last meeting. All 3 of those correspondents were not in favor of, actually correction, 2 of those were not in favor of having any type of pop-up memorials and having regulation on placement of memorials and oversight. We did receive one that was in favor of it, but wanted a billboard placed up this, on 347. So our discussion today is follow up with the timeline that the memorial markers would be placed, and that's why we're seeking direction from council.
So on item 3, it talks about in place for 1 year. And through a lot of the discussions that I purposely had in Maricopa do an article on this because I wanted people to engage. And there were some people that engaged, and I appreciated it because it allowed me to have dialogue with them back and forth. And then I also spoke with a lot of people, pastors, those types of folks that deal with these types of losses, and 1 year seemed too short. So I would be in favor of 2 years, and I'd love to hear what the rest of my council has to say on that.
I concur. I mentioned that this last time in our last discussion, that 1 year seemed to be a little too much of or too short of a time.
Yes?
I don't think the city should be involved in the memorial business at all.
I do have to agree with that statement because, again, it's very personal. And then to sit here and say we're going to paint a picture for them or have them help us paint a picture, I'm kind of torn between the two. I do like the idea that if we paint that picture, we're able to maintain it, and I would go for something more like 2 or 3 years myself if we're going to decide that's what it is. But it is a very personal thing, and I think 1 year is definitely not enough.
It's a sensitive subject, and we do hear both sides. We do hear that, they are a distraction. Some of them are not maintained and become a blight. And then we also hear the side that, people want to leave their, something behind to memorialize. And we're trying to find that in between to satisfy the most we can.
Yeah.
And council, absent some form of regulation, anything goes. It could be big, it could be little, it could be bright, it could be here, it could be there. So without regulation, you're basically opening the door for anything and everything, and then what do you do?
Yeah, so in trying to represent the constituency, like I said, I had a lot of conversations, and the amount of years that it would be allowed to be up was one thing. The $300, most people felt that at cost would be more appropriate because you're now able to, have an idea what the sign's going to look like, but it's at cost without any additional cost. And then overwhelmingly, I heard that we should allow for a 30-day or 60-day temporary monument of flowers of some type, which typically happens, and it seems very acceptable to me. I don't know how you all feel about it, but the idea that there be an allowance for that temporary solution that people feel when this type of thing happens, and you normally see groups of flowers and candles, and so those are three thoughts that I wanted to make sure we either had agreement or we just bypassed entirely, but 2 years at cost and temporary allowed for 30 days, 60 days, whatever you feel.
So Mayor, if I could.
Their particular flowers.
If I can address those. Of course, the 2 years is fine. The at cost is not just the making of the sign. You now have to mow around it, you have to rake around it, when we have to rake out gravel, when we have to replane the stormwater wash on the side when they rut it up with cars. We have to work around that sign, and if we really did at cost for actual city cost, it would probably be far more than $300.
No, I understand that.
So
Yeah.
it's a bargain, especially now if we're doing 2 years instead of one. And then on flowers and candles, I've seen that from one set of flowers to where it takes up 20 square feet. And again, without regulations, and again, candles, glass, light lit candles,
Well, we can
fire
control it.
hazards.
Yeah, I think maybe suggestions or regulations on what is put out there is a good idea. But most of the folks that I talk to, the immediate sentiment of flowers and a presentation for 30 or 60 days didn't bother them. It was the times when it's gone on for years and it is looking pretty.
Well, I agree, but I'm speaking from a liability point of view for the city, and if we're willing to take on that liability, that's certainly a decision for the council to make, and I'd be happy to have our attorney address that, but glass on the right-of-way, kids coming out, breaking it, shattered glass, kids in bare feet.
Yep.
It goes on and on and on, and again, it's all what-ifs, but we find that what-ifs do occur.
Sure. I'd be satisfied with a temporary solution that allowed them to express themselves with flowers. Problem with that?
Well,
And size, I could see.
well, again, are you going to allow them to have 10 square feet, 20 square feet, 100 people come out and put flowers, or 2, or do the flowers come in glass vases? Are they just bundled? Do they set them down?
Well, I think we'd need a whole new paragraph to kind of define that.
Well,
Mayor,
can I suggest that we not let this issue get in the way of our progress tonight, and we'll come back on that one?
Absolutely.
On the
And I just
monument.
wanted to talk about it and get other ideas.
Perhaps we could take a look at what other
For these
cities do.
temporary memorial markers, I'm not sure that I'm very concerned about the size of those memorials, as I am perhaps the infringement of the right-of-way and the safety issues.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if we can control that, making sure that it is out of the right-of-way, that the ADA is being met, I'm not too terribly concerned for a larger display.
Well, to be clear, what people will do is they'll just start putting it out there, and then the city will have to be the bad guy to come by and say, okay, this half of them have to be moved. Of course, we don't know who to call, we don't know who to give them back to, and we'll just have to take them. They're now encroached on the sidewalk, or they're now doing this, and of course, it was supposed to be just flowers, now they're putting signs and ribbons and teddy bears, and that's what people do. So again,
But regardless of what we write into code, we're still going to have those issues of enforcement. And so
Well-
I think up front, we need to be fair and sensitive to the needs of those families to grieve and to express their memories, but do it in a way that's appropriate. And
well, we just need regulations that we can be clear
Enforce.
about and rely on. But right now, we have no regulations.
Right.
And that's why we have the situation we have. But if we say, pretty much, I don't know how to word that. We can talk about it. I have no idea how we can word that, because someone will say, well, why can't we do candles? Why can't we do teddy bears? Why can't we do a bicycle? Why can't we put, my dog got killed, I want a doghouse.
Yeah, I think let's come back with a suggestion.
And it's going to be tough. you know, because
I
it's
don't think
all,
it's
it
part
is
of our
personal.
temporary sign code.
What was that?
So remove it from temporary sign code. I don't think it should be part of it. I still believe we shouldn't be in the memorial business. When people want to put the memorials up, they're going to put them up the day after, 2 days later, that somebody passes, and that stuff goes up. We're not going to be pivoting to designing markers and installing them within days for those folks anyway. It just, I don't think we should be in the business at all. If we're going to regulate it, if we're going to regulate it, it should be not part of the temporary sign code. It should be part of code, put it somewhere else. And it should be, you get 1 square foot to memorialize it for 12 months or whatever it is, and then it's removed. But that's me.
May I suggest, that, again, I agree with you that it should not be part of the code, and let's just bring it back and address it as a city policy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Separate.
Just another thought based on what you said. I'm perfectly fine with actually us looking at allowing a temporary 30, I'm only using that word because I want it to be temporary, 30 or 60-day memorial of flowers, define what it could be, and not doing the memorial markers. I'm fine with that as well. I just feel like we need to have some restriction on how long these things stay up
Okay.
and what size and where they placed and,
Okay, we'll bring this issue back after more
Okay.
input and more discussion as a separate policy decision and separate it out from the sign code.
Thank you.
That concludes my presentation for the changes.
Wes, could we take a moment and go back through those slides you had? I'd like to,
Absolutely. Can we go back
we
to
can just
the
go through those real
PowerPoint?
quick. Just go back to the very beginning. So we won't hit them all, but obviously this is blocking ADA and is a problem. Next. This isn't blocking ADA, but it's just a very cluttered look, and they're all clustered together. As you see the open house sign, you can't even read the sign behind it. There's 2 open houses right there together, which speaks to the distancing that we were referring to. Next. Again, on the sidewalk and clutter. Next. You see they're taping them to street signage. They're in the, go ahead to the next one. And again, sidewalk, next one. And you see go back, I'm sorry. You see the balloon, how it's blowing into the drive path? That theoretically could hit a low-profile car and block a line of sight. Now, that's the kind of things we think about because that's our job. Next. Same thing, that's a wider sidewalk there, so they do have a path. Next. You see all the tape marks and everything, and by the way, that's a private property, that box, that's not city property. Next. We're actually in the drive lane. Let's go one more. Out in the middle of the road. So these are things that people can hit, and, we just have to be careful of. So, but that's good enough. So thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I'll add on to those signs right there. We had there was an organization doing an event here a couple months ago, and they threw a fit about signs because they were told they couldn't have signs or whatever, but they were told they can put some signs up, and they went and they put the signs up, and a week after the event, I pulled over and I pulled down 2 of their signs and put them in the back of my car and dropped them off at the event organizer's house. And I was like, this is the stuff, man. It's like you were allowed to put your signs up, but you didn't take them down. And I drove past them for a week until I was like, fine. I pulled over and got them for them. But it's that kind of stuff that drives you crazy because no matter how lenient you are, no matter how restrictive you are, there's going to be problems. And somebody's going to get upset about something.
Absolutely.
thank you, Wes. So at this point, I'd like to, by show of hands, see if there's anyone that wants to come forward and speak. I saw Tina's hand first, so I'll let her come up.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tina Dugan, and I live in Glenwild. I am the HOA president. Rich, what was the question you had for an HOA board member?
Do you allow for people to put yard signs that say garage sale? Do you allow them to stay overnight, a weekend? I have no problem with it as a board member in Cobblestone, but I also am the one who picks them up and goes and brings them to their houses.
Our
like-
landscapers take them down on Monday.
And if they don't, what happens to them?
If the people don't take them down, our landscapers do. That's the way we work with our landscapers, is to make sure they're not there.
I have the same landscapers now, so I'll go.
So I did want to show you, this is my, I think from the town hall, but the circles are the ones that you've actually addressed, and I appreciate that. There's a couple of things that I would like to talk about. The first one being due process. Our sign code has no definitions. The right-of-way today, I heard the 5 feet from the edge of curb. I really like that. But then again, when we were talking on the major streets, they said there's no signs in the right-of-way, only on private property. Well, if it's 5 feet from the edge of the curb and you're on a major street, how do you define that? And I was told by Code Enforcement Officer Dean Didwitty that it is my responsibility to go to the county assessor's website and find out where the right-of-way is. I find that to be disturbing because there is no, well, I know how to do it. How many of the citizens of this town would know to do that? I mean, really, that's code enforcement's job to define what that is. And I think the 5 feet from this curb edge is easily understood. I appreciate going the 5 feet because 10 foot in Acacia Crossings, you cannot put any sign outside of Acacia Crossing because it's only 9.5 feet from the edge of the curb to the block walls. So,
Excuse me, Tina, where did you see that there was a conflict to the 5 feet from the
well,
curb?
when we were discussing, it said that the signs can only go on private property. So we started out saying 5 feet from the edge of the curb, and then it was, but they can only go on city property is what the city manager
That
said,
is
on
stated-
private property.
Right, that's stated throughout
So
altogether.
if it can only go on private property, how do we know where the private property line is if we're going to use the 5 feet from the edge of the curb, which makes sense? Is that right away? Is that private property? I know our HOA does not put anything on whether they can get there, but it's still ambiguous and difficult to understand. And again, I think normally codes and things have definitions. Ours does not have any definitions to help you understand.
Okay, so Wes and Josh, could you guys take notes on being able to let's get all of her questions and then address them.
And I do appreciate the amount needed to get to a place, the direction that you talked about, instead of a number, but the correct amount. I understand the congestion on 347, but the majority of places that I place signs is I start at the edge of a neighborhood and go in, except for Tortosa. Come on, there's nothing between here and there, and if you only have a mile, where are you gonna, there's nowhere to put it. I also wanted to talk about the enforcement, the due process, the signs that get put behind the dumpster. We were told, I heard it stated that, well, that's too much for our code enforcement officers to have to make these notifications and everything. As a law enforcement officer, when I enforce the law, which code enforcement is enforcing the law, the city code of Maricopa, they should be able to delegate where the sign was taken from, why it was taken, and be able to notify the person if their name is on there, their phone number or something. That is part of the process of code enforcement. If they can just go out and take signs and not notify people and keep the signs and hope that they come behind the dumpster at City Hall, first of all, how will anyone ever know where their signs went? I know one of the commercial developers here, I saw his signs behind the dumpster. He had no idea where that sign had gone, had never received a notification or anything. Our current code only has the notification process for political signs, which the city can't even really enforce political signs. So it's kind of comical that that's the way that falls in there. Finally, I wanted to talk about the education process. I think once this is all completed and everything, when I spoke to you on June 7th, I asked for education, and instead of education, we received an email stating, here's the sign code, learn it. And we know from talking to different code enforcement officers, they all enforced it differently. I think a brochure like you used to have that states this is how it is for yard sale, this is where they can go and where they can't, you're never going to reach all the people. There are people that are going to violate it. The examples that were shown up there are not Maricopa agents that care about this community. The churches that care about this community and have residents that elect you all are the people that we need to make sure know what the law is and are able to use it to still do the business or organization that they have. Thank you.
Thank you. So Wes or Joss, could you address her couple questions?
The way it's written in city code, as far as the notification, is to notify and provide 5 days to return the signs. My inspectors do a good job to do the best they can. Sometimes there's not either names or identifiers on the signs. Some of them are generic signs. We do have a process. I kind of changed the in-house process as far as how the signs are tagged. They're actually now dated. They're also dated when the notification occurred and how long the signs will be there. And we do allow additional time if agents for some reason are out of town or cannot get to them within those 5 days. Our intent is not to just throw away the signs. We have had issues with individuals going back on the weekends or after hours into the enclosure and digging through the signs, and which has created a little bit of a mess. We're working to find a better way to secure that, and that way it's more controllable.
So Wes, on that, you said it's part of the sign code, but I didn't read that in here. I only read it for political signs.
It's in our process. I believe it was in previous code, so I'd have to dive back into this one. It's not under temporary signage. That is our process, though, as well.
So Mayor and Council, our staff takes a picture of the sign before they remove it and note the location. They do have a record of all of it. The vast majority of the signs do not have names and phone numbers or whatever on them. In addition to that, a lot of these signs, after weather and wind, they pick them up out of ditches or in the parking lots, and they're just strewn about. And again, we recognize that there are people who are very protective of their signs and try to do a good job in the community, but there's a segment that does not. For us, how do we know which is which? We don't know unless they conform. Likewise, if we do have a sign with a phone number, whatever, we do try to call them. If it's a yard sale, they do try to go to the yard sale, and they will tell them and educate them. But are we 100% no? Because it's not a 100% business. Just can't do it all. We do plan, as we stated earlier in the meeting, that we will prepare a pictorial and a educational piece once the decision is made on what the rules are. Codes by nature are defined and very difficult to read because they have a legal basis to them, and they have to be very defined in order to uphold a case in a court setting. So,
Go right ahead.
Wes, I wanted to ask, so in Tina's question about asking for being phone called, obviously, if they're realtors or churches, we have numbers and phone numbers on those. I agree that those should be called.
Correct.
The ones that are in the back of your truck, that was 20, 30, 40, 50 of them, that don't have them, they belong in the trash. I'm just going to be honest. We're not here to clean up trash. But I do agree when it comes to realtors, churches, or anything that has a number on it, I do believe that a phone call should be made. I do agree with that.
Absolutely. And anything that has a
Councilman,
value.
can I ask? I would agree first time, maybe a second time. What if it's third, fourth, fifth, sixth time?
for realtors or ones that,
Any of the above,
Then
if
then
they're
again-
repeat offenders.
if they want us to make a rule and they don't stick by it, then let's fine them. Plain and simple. If you're not going to follow something you guys agree with, then I think we should fine the person. And
So-
don't let them put their signs, take them, and then let them pay for them to get them back.
So all of our code issues, regardless of the nature, not just signs, but everything out there, we have about a 97% voluntary compliance because all we do is tell them you have an infraction and we want you to fix it. We don't fine them, but we do keep a record because if it continues to happen, then we obviously it begins to take a lot of staff time.
Absolutely.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
Who else would like to speak? This gentleman in the front.
All right, thank you guys. My name is Jeremy Waters. I'm a local business owner and also a licensed real estate agent. First off, thanks for taking the time to listen to us today. So I took a couple of notes while we've been talking. There's a few things that I just wanted to talk about, not really any questions, just some points. City Manager Horst, to your point about the signs being on the 347 at Honeycutt or Smith Anke or whatever. So every agent in here and every agent in the city at the current moment with the current code is entitled to 6 signs wherever they want to place them on private property or whatever, as long as they're within a certain feet of whatever. There could be 50 signs 20 feet apart from each other pointing down Smith Anke. So I think that problem is going to be what it is regardless of how many signs they have. If a real estate agent decides that one of the signs they want to put is on the 347, then they're entitled to do so as long as it's within the spacing that they're required to do. Mayor, as far as what you were saying, as far as directional signs, I am 100% on board with that. I agree with that. Me personally have had several open houses where I have had a necessity for at least 12 signs. And Vice Mayor Vidiello, that was something that I was going to be touching on. So you said 10. I personally have had the need for 12. I do think that anything much more than that is excessive. I personally had worked with a real estate agent that was very excessive with his sign usage. He had 30 plus signs for every open house. That's definitely excessive. There's no need for that. It draws the attention, but I mean, let's be real. Another point is that we're professionals, and you referenced the professional members of our community here, and that they're not really the major offenders. It's the yard sale guys, those people. The professionals are going to be the people that are suffering from a 6 limit sign usage or some of these other regulations that are being talked about. The homeowners are going to put their signs up wherever they want, regardless of what the law is. They're going to stick it to a stop sign. That's already against the law, and they do it. So regardless of what the code is, they're going to do what they're going to do, and us professionals are going to be the ones that are following the guidelines and the codes and limiting our abilities to do business here in town. So I just wanted to point that out, and hopefully we can come to an agreement on all of this. So thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to approach? Yes, the lady in the purple jacket.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having this workshop. My name is Liz Recchia, Government Affairs Director for the We Serve Association of Realtors. And not only is our membership real estate agents and brokers, but we also have members that are several other types of businesses, not just titles and escrows as you would imagine, but also we have people who make gift baskets and they have a gift basket business. We have people who are dry cleaners, and we have people who are plumbers and electricians and people like that. So we have a wide range of businesses as well as our real estate licensees. And from my members, what I have received is input that right now there's a lot of confusion, as we mentioned in our letter to you. So one of our biggest concerns at We Serve is that signage be adequate, visible, and legible. Adequate to the task to which it is trying to accomplish its goals. And temporary signage, that of course could mean a number of signs to adequately guide you from one location to the place that you are trying to go to. It could also mean in a commercial district that someone who is located, particularly a small startup business who is located very deep inside of a multiple layer industrial, medical, or office complex may need some kind of directional signage just before the place where you're going to turn to find them. So we recognize that all of those uses are part of temporary signage. When it comes to visible, the ability to actually see that there is a sign is necessary. And in that letter, we also referenced a couple of studies, particularly the science of the visual arc. So what does it take for a person who is walking to see a sign versus someone who's driving down a road with no lane change versus a person who's driving down a road with one or more lane changes? And as your speed and your lane changes are increased, then the amount of signage or the size of signage will change so the person's eye can catch that. Particularly on streets, we are concerned so that people don't make quick lane changes as they catch a glimpse of that sign. So that's something that we always look to. And there have been a lot of cities, but particularly a few cities, particularly in Maricopa County, who have taken that science of the visual arc and incorporated it as part of their ongoing sign ordinances. And they actually test it as part of a software platform where they can see how signage is seen, different types of signage at different placements at different times, so they can judge whether their code is adequate to those. When it comes to legibility, it's the ability to actually read what that sign says. We have seen signs that are large in structure, and you can see there's a sign, but for the life of you, you cannot read what that sign is trying to tell you, which negates the use of that sign. We've also seen instances in which signs have had a visual barrier to addresses, particularly in some of the commercial districts, or to the sign itself. And sometimes that comes through a landscaping code that may require certain landscaping that eventually over years will overtake that signage. So we look for things like that. All of those are part of what makes a sign that is usable and adequate to the task that the person conveying that speech is trying to provide you. When it comes to some of our rural areas and the thought that how many signs do you need over a distance, a mile or two, to get to where you are going, we have had cities who have, other than you, have dealt with that issue. And of course, sign clutter is always the issue, as well as safety concerns. And over time, they have been able to adopt so many feet per distance of signage. So I can give you some examples of some of those cities and send you those cities' codes so that you can see what they have come up, and perhaps it is informative or useful to you as well. But that is an ongoing issue across our region. I also want to offer to you, first of all, thank you for the suggestions and conversation about the signs at turns that are needed in order to effectively get to your destination. We appreciate that, that you took that into consideration and are discussing it. When it comes to the time limit of signs during sunup to sundown, I will just put this out as a mention, and if it is relative to your conversation now, terrific. If it is not, then perhaps in the future it might come up. We know that there are sometimes events or even open houses, but events that will be in the nighttime hours. They'll have an evening event. So signage going in, sometimes in those situations, sunup to sundown does not help you, but if you had some kind of alternative to that for those types of events in the evening hours with the time limit of within a certain amount of time, a certain number of hours prior and after the event, signs be picked up, that can be very helpful, and we've had cities who have done that as well. As you heard, the right-of-way conversation is very confusing and people aren't sure where it is, and I will just say that illustrations help so much. Our cities that have adopted illustrations, what does a visual triangle look like? because people don't know. What are the distances from the visual triangle? Those illustrations are very helpful. What is the edge of the street? What is the edge of the curb? Those types of illustrations are very helpful for people. Even though they're reading the words, they may not understand what that is. So visual illustrations are very helpful, not to mention illustrations of the types of signs and the locations of signs that you were speaking of. In fact, in Peoria, they were very kind after they finished updating their sign ordinance. They went through signs, particular categories of signs, and put out what I call cheat sheets to the public that you could take. And if you were doing a temporary signage, it was a temporary signage cheat sheet, one for residential areas, one for commercial areas. If you were in a special overlay area, they had a cheat sheet with the signage verbiage, but also the illustrations. You may find that is helpful to conveying your message as well when you conclude your discussions and finalize your updates. When it comes to the question about what are people looking for as they're looking around signs, we find that one of the most popular way for people to find businesses and properties for sale or lease is to start driving the areas that they are interested in. And they will find and they look at the signs, and that's how they find a lot of things. Yes, there are people who will look for a particular development or a particular commercial center or a particular type of business. But we also find that there's a large number of people who just go to the area that they believe they are interested in and start wandering around, seeing what they can see. We find that in medical offices, as office building complexes, as well as in neighborhoods. When it comes to, one other question I wanted to make sure. Repeat offenders and the due process. Yes, our cities have always been concerned about not only the due process part of it, but how do we prevent repeat offenders from repeating to offend without making sure that they pay a price. And I will say several of our cities have incorporated that process. And once again, I can send you examples of some of the other cities and how they have dealt with that. Perhaps it will help you come up with a policy that is great for the city of Maricopa as well. So with that, I would like to say I am looking forward to working with the city of Maricopa. Thank you so much for having this workshop, for reading our letter, and for considering our thoughts.
Thank you. Yes, the young lady in the white jacket, sweater. I'm sorry, I don't know everyone's name.
Oh, yeah, no worries. This is actually my first time here, so I just want to say thank you all for taking this undertaking because I am one of those so-called repeat offenders. My name is Dana Molyneux, and I own a mixed-use property in the Heritage District. I think everybody's made some really good points about having a clearly defined or easily defined point of reference for everybody to work from. So as part of my repeat offender process, I guess, is that my daughter opened a business. We were using some A-frame signs, and for the first several weeks, we had run-ins with the ordinance patrol, or I don't know, code enforcement, I guess you would say. But part of that was that every code enforcer was interpreting things a little differently. And my husband even spoke with Wesley Moss and came upon an agreement because the code was confusing from the layperson's standpoint. And they had come up with an agreement, and there was still subsequent issues following that, where their agreement maybe didn't get passed on to the code enforcers. So I do believe that the education component, not just for the residents and the business owners here in town, is important. I really like the idea of that cheat sheet or some sort of simplified version for people to reference would be magnificent. But then also having those definitions and having things that are a little more clearly defined, because our property is one of those on Taft where we own, our private property goes through the street and onto the neighboring sidewalk. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, but I do appreciate you all looking at this, and I think that there's definitely a need for those improvements.
So question for you,
Yes.
and possibly for Wes as well. Given the incidences that you have had and experienced, do you feel like the code as it's been modified so far has met the need of clarification for your business?
Yes, because we were actually told we could not get a permit for what we were trying to accomplish. And I believe just looking at what I have, or what I've seen just from my seat here, is that we may need to go through the permitting process, which would then, at that point, really give us that opportunity to come to a written agreement or something that we, both us and the city, can feel good about moving forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Someone else like to speak? Yes, the gentleman in the purple shirt.
Hi, my name is Sean Leonard. I am a local real estate agent also. So thank you guys for having us. And so I think the couple ones that jumped out at me as the biggest is, first off, signs within 20 feet. If you're trying to get somebody to turn in a corner and someone else has already put a sign there, or a yard sale sign or anything else, then you're way too far away. And I mean, you kind of go into the entrance of Rancho and you look at, if you're trying to do 20 feet apart, and that's just one example, but all the way down the street where you're trying to do a turn, even the example they showed where there were 3 signs close to each other, 2 of those were agents trying to show somebody how to get to their property. If you told that one they couldn't do it, then how are they supposed to direct them? You're missing one of your turns. I think that's the biggest one, is that you've got to be able to shorten that down and have it where they can have a sign there. And plus, how does the code enforcement person know who's the first person there? So are they going to pick up all 3 of them? And that's where I think there's the confusion too, because with the signs, we've had it where we're putting them out and they're picking them up, and we're trying to follow the code and everything else. And every time we've done that, sometimes it's not clear. And each, as they've kind of talked about, each code enforcement person has a different philosophy on it. And then let me see here. And then the amount of signs also, I know people have kind of talked about that, Jeremy mentioned it, is that even in like Rancho, front subdivision, if you've got something way back in the middle there, that's just one subdivision. A lot of the subdivisions where you're going further back or somewhere else, trying to get somebody to that with 6, even 10 is hard. And then you also have to think about future-proofing this, because as town expands out into acreage and and you start dealing with something that further out where something like that, it could be even further. And so being able to do more than 10 signs does make sense, because you've got to be able to get people to the house, or what's the point of doing it? And that's the biggest thing, is we need to be able to do these open houses to help sell our properties and help the clients be able to do that, or else home prices in Maricopa are going to be affected, where if we can't help people sell and say, hey, one of our main things for selling your home is doing an open house, that really hurts it. So, well, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Excuse me, sir.
Yep.
Yeah.
How many signs do you want?
Huh?
How many signs do you want?
How many signs do I want?
Yeah.
I want enough to get to the property.
Sorry?
I want enough to get to the property and be able to also
20?
have a couple.
Well, what I'm asking is because if you don't like 10, you don't like 12.
I mean,
what do
at least
you
the
want?
20 would be a good number for some of those places, because again, that's what you need. And then you also will have a couple in front of the house. So that's included in your total number. So if you said 6 and I've got a sign in front of the house, or 2, that means I only really have 4 signs to get people back to it.
Okay. So then the other question is, your signs are directional. So if I put mine 10 feet from here and the turn is 50 feet away, am I not going to know to turn right? So you're telling me you need to have multiple ones to get you to the next turn?
Not to the next turn. I'm saying, well, the first issue was because I can only have 20 feet from another sign.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're saying that I have to be 20 feet away from that other sign, that means I'm 20, 30, there could be already another turn that I'm pointing at that the person thinks in some of those subdivisions within that distance. You know what I mean? Because now, by the time you're putting 20 feet from another person's sign to be in code. So that's the first issue. But yeah, multiple signs is more for each turn. Getting further back into some of those subdivisions, you're going to have multiple turns. I mean, you one street, next street, and you're turning. So that could be multiple signs.
Okay. And then the other issue is you had mentioned after that about, okay, so 20 feet apart, 10 feet apart, whatever the number is you want.
Yeah.
How are we going to determine how many signs you're going to have within that particular space? Because if there's 6 realtors, generally I don't see any more than about 4 or 5, I may be off by a few, at any given Saturday or Sunday, having signs out. Let's even say there's 10.
Correct.
When does it end? When does the number stop where our city doesn't look like, I can bring one of those signs, pictures back up? Is that what you want our city to look like? I'm just
No.
asking you a question.
Yeah, I understand, but so here's the thing though. Each one of those people that you're talking about, those 10, has a client they're trying to help them sell their house.
Sure.
So they need to be able to take care of that person who is also a registered voting person in town. They need to be able to help them. So that person, they're trying to get the signs. So if it's from, in Rancho and there's 10 different agents having it, they should be allowed to have 10 signs at the front of Rancho in that, or in whatever subdivision it is, being able to point, and then a sign at the turn for each of their streets that's going back to that house.
Okay, I just wanted to ask you a few
Yeah,
questions.
no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to approach the podium? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Dawn Dutra. I am a neighbor of Rich, and I've been a resident here since 2008. I spent over 20 years doing social work and education, and recently, past few years, I've been a realtor here as I retired from teaching. Everything everyone said, I completely agree with, for the most part. One of the biggest things is education, and we keep talking about it back and forth. It feels like it's a circle here. And I dealt twice with the sign code people, and both times different information was given to me. After a college-educated person has read the sign code very carefully, sat in meetings with other realtors to determine exactly what I needed to do. I did exactly what I believed I was supposed to do. The very first open house that I did way out in Tortosa with my 5 signs that nobody could see because there's, 5 is nothing for Tortosa. Every one of my signs but one was taken down. And I didn't even know until somebody's like, I didn't see any signs coming here, and we found it using Google Maps. So I was a little upset by that, and then I had to go in my professional attire to a dumpster, retrieve my signs, which was really infuriating, to be quite honest, which I did send a letter, but I didn't send it till 4:30, so you guys may not have seen it yet. But I just think education of the code enforcers, because in the second, I would have swore that I followed it to the T. And then I had a recent one in Sonita, and basically not the same thing exact happened. The other gentleman is different. I don't even know who the first person was. He didn't contact me. My name was on every sign, my email, my picture, everything's on there. Not one bit of contact to me. But the second interaction, the guy was nice enough to come, knock on the door, and he told me that my sign was 6 inches too close. So I said, oh, did you measure it? He says, well, no, but it looks about 6 inches too close. And I said, well, I measured it because my feet are exactly 12 inches with my shoes on, and I counted steps out. And I said, but I'll go move it if you would like me to move it, because I don't want to be fined. And he said, well, I'll let it slide. Which I was like, okay. So then I said, well, what about my other signs? What about these signs? Well, how do you feel about those? And he goes, well, that one's too close too. And I said, well, I measured that one from the curb 10 feet again. And he goes, well, no, it's 10 feet from over there, not there. And I was like, well, what is the code? And to me, I feel like I read it. I sat in meetings about it. I know how to read. So the sign code people were giving different information, doing different, I don't know what you call them, whatever you are, where they're supposed to be doing. I don't know. Are they supposed to contact me? Are they supposed to just throw them in the trash? I don't know. So it's discouraging. I'm a resident here. I live here. I've been a part of the community a long time. And to go to have an open house, and every time I get so nervous. Am I going to get my sign stolen? Am I going to break a law? Because I'm not a lawbreaker. So I just wanted to state that, because it really isn't. It's kind of infuriating in a way. As a resident, as a local, business person here, it's frustrating. And I just feel like education is, we're doing our job, us realtors. We're reading, we're trying everything we possibly can. I don't know if everyone that is working on this project is working as hard as maybe some of us realtors are. So thank you very much. Please read my letter that I did email at 4:30 today. and thank you for letting me speak tonight.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? All right, excellent. I appreciate all the feedback. I know you all do. Oh, Josh, go right ahead.
I just want to make sure a couple of the comments that you guys made get addressed. The right-of-way, back of curb as it is proposed in this, one of the directions that staff will need is what you would like to do with public right-of-way, as we said in those, shows in those pictures. In fact, Abel, if you wouldn't mind, maybe pull those up again. That right-of-way is inconsistent within the city. Some of it is right at the curb, some of it is back the sidewalk, some of it is the back of the residents' homes. The decisions.
Yeah, get us to a picture where we can talk about it.
So if you look here, how shaky is my hand, but here's the back of the curb, here's the back of the sidewalk, but the right-of-way goes all the way
Wait a
back to
second, we
here.
can't see where you are.
Council, if I may, I think because we said the right-of-ways vary so greatly and it would be hard to have a definition, I think that's where we decided that 5 feet
I like
to
that.
10 feet behind the edge of road, and we could clarify that, mean if there's no curb, is the edge of pavement. If there's a curb, it's the edge of curb. If it's a sidewalk, it's edge of sidewalk. We could add those clarifications in the code to do that, but that way people don't have to worry about going out
I
there.
agree.
If it's 30 foot wide, you have to stay off of it. Now, in reality, it could create some problems, so I'm letting you know, if someone comes forward at a later date and challenges us, we'll have to address it. But what I'm recommending to you is that we give this an opportunity to work, and if we get a challenge by somebody who wants to put something up that's not community standard, then we'll have to address it at that time.
I'm probably wrong here, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. If we allow a open house sign in the right of way, we have to allow a carpet cleaning sign in the right of way. We have to allow the carpet
Correct.
repair in the right of way,
Yes.
the tamale sale, and everything else.
Brick and mortar stores, anything.
Yes,
Everything.
And to be clear, everything we talk about tonight is not specific to real estate sales. It's specific to all temporary signs,
Yeah.
period.
So no matter, we can be as lenient as we want to be, but unfortunately, then we're as lenient as everybody will take it. So there'll be signs there for bike repair and a for sale for a car if they want. Anybody could put any sign, not just open house, but anything, if we allow it.
Then that
So-
would be in residential zoning for non-residential uses. Again, we do need to separate. Commercial zoning has different regulations.
And this here is, the one you have up here, this is the residential zoning, correct?
Yes, this is a residential zone.
So on this, anywhere between the two blue lines, see the orange in there, from orange to blue, right? Anywhere in there, there's no signs allowed.
So right now, that is all right-of-way, city right-of-way.
Right, and there's no signs allowed right now.
If it is as it's stated on private property, correct. That would all be city right-of-way, which means no sign would be allowed there.
Right, so
If-
right now, no signs allowed. And if you were to pull into Santa Cruz right there, when you look into Santa Cruz, you see the blue line. Anything below that blue line is private property. Not right away, right?
Correct.
So they can put their signs there, but they can't put them on, what is that, Smith Enke, right? Yeah, they
Correct.
can't put them anywhere on Smith Enke. No one can, currently.
Correct. And that is where the discussions and guidance is because right-of-way is in different places, if we go to Taft,
And so your options is all, nothing, or, like I said, working with the 5 to 10 foot range.
Right.
Until there's a reason not to.
Now on Taft, a little different. Taft, there is no right-of-way.
correct, there's an easement.
Right, but it's private property. So currently, if I'm wrong, correct me, currently, they can put them there.
With exceptions. It can't block traffic, it can't
Right.
block handicap access, it can't block sidewalks, you know.
Right, there's no sidewalks there, there's no handicap access there, so you're not blocking anything. So if you're on the dirt on Taft, you can put any sign you want.
So again, this is why we want to clean this code up and present these things, because
Right.
it is difficult under the current code to see the ins and outs of all of these right-of-ways, back of curb, those
Under
types of
current
things.
code, the way it is written right now, they can have signs there.
In my
I'll
opinion,
defer to Wes on that.
in my opinion, the answer is yes, provided it doesn't block, again, line of sight,
Right.
traffic patterns, et cetera, et cetera.
So that is the biggest confusion, right? It's
Attorney
when you
agrees.
look at, huh?
The attorney agrees.
Yeah, so when you look at the right-of-way issue, that is the biggest issue. Because once we allow right-of-way access to open house signs and/or to yard signs, we have to allow it to the Little League to put up the signs for the kids joining, every football league, and there's like 7 of them, every club team, every mattress salesman.
There's still temporary signs.
That's not an event?
There's still temporary signs.
Yeah, they're temporary signs.
Doesn't matter if it's
So
advertising
if they're
an
having
event
a
or.
sale on mattresses for the weekend, for Labor Day, they can put them up. So that is the biggest problem, is trying to figure out where we sit on how we can enforce having the city have the open house signs but not allow the others, because you cannot say yes to this, no to this. We can't delineate open house signs from I'm selling my car this weekend, right? You can't do that. That's what it is, and so they're just temporary signs, right? So it's not an event; it's a temporary sign.
So let me clarify just for my own purpose, because many of you may already have it, but, so a non-residential use in a residential zone, you can't categorize what that's to be used for. And let me give you an example. So we currently said home businesses, which to me makes sense, directional signs to open houses, to me makes sense. But if one of our restaurants wants to go to the center of every community and put directional signs to their restaurant, are you indicating that that has to be accepted as well?
Yes.
I think we could amend the code, so if you're saying temporary signs for a use in the home, we don't care what that is, we don't care if it's a birthday party, we don't care if it's a car sale, we don't care if it's an estate sale, we can't do any of that. But if you wanted to say it has to be something happening in a home, you could do that. But that could include, I've picked up Little League shirts and flag football gear in a home.
Yeah, and
So
it
that stuff
also
does happen.
includes the massage business out of a home, and the car detailing business out of a home, and the person selling Avon, and the person selling, do they still have Avon? I think they do, right? Selling anything, no matter what it is, it's out of their home, it's a business. And we have, 600 home businesses in the city of Maricopa. So 800, I think it is now. I think it's 800. So we have 800 home businesses in the city of Maricopa, and imagine 800 signs in Maricopa Meadows and throughout the city. So that's the hardest part, is when you come to it and you say, well, we just want to allow open house signs. Well, tough. We got to allow it all, right? So, and I understand we can play with it and say, well, we're just going to allow open house signs until it gets to be too much. But the minute you take down the mattress sale sign, that person has a case against you because you didn't take down the open house sign next to it, or the garage sale sign next to that, or whatever it is. In regard to direction stuff, just quickly, I had a yard sale this past weekend because my wife wanted to get rid of stuff. We made $400. It was pretty good. So she made me make up 3-4 signs. So I went out and I looked at everyone else's yard signs and I used them, right? So I was like, well, there's an arrow pointing to my house. I'm gonna put mine over here. And so I tactically used other people's yard sign sales to get my 3 working. But I kept them 10 feet off, and yeah, because my wife was like, somebody's gonna get a photo of you putting up a sign, and I'm like, yeah, I know. But we put them up, and we did it all perfectly. Nobody came and took my signs. Nobody put Facebook posts saying, look at Manfredi. But we got our signs up when we did it, but I tactically used other people's yard signs to direct them to my house. And when you look at open house signs for realtors, I would suggest you do the same, right? So if you see somebody having an open house sign, put yours down a little bit further, and you lead yourselves to one another. You help each other out. But of course, you have the people coming from Phoenix, Glendale, Gilbert, and I have no idea why people hire realtors from outside the city to sell a house here. But they do, and those are the biggest offenders, and those are the people who are going to hurt you guys, because they're going to put the signs in the middle of the street, they're going to put the signs in the right-of-way, they're going to do those things, and then, of course, it leaks onto you. But, yeah, so this is a fun and exciting conversation.
Well, I'll accept a comment.
Okay, sorry, Councilmember Manfredi, you were talking about all of the temporary signs that could go up, the Little League signs, this and that. As the current code stands, they are allowed to do that.
That's what I was going to say as well.
You are going to have that problem regardless of what's going on, but regardless of what the code states, unless you just completely ban temporary signs all around. And key word in this subject is that they are temporary. So if they put a sign up inside of the code, then they're also going to be removing that sign. You're not going to have a city littered with temporary signs because people are going to be picking them up and taking them down, especially those of us that are having temporary signs that we want to keep and we want to reuse. So you're not going to have a city littered with temporary signs everywhere advertising every single business that they could possibly do. It's just not going to happen. Now, I get you have to take that there is a possibility of it, but the likelihood is just not that. I will
Before you continue, just to clarify, currently under, if we go back a slide, right? Currently under current sign code, right now, it's not allowed, right? So it's not allowed to have those Little League signs and or open house signs. The discussion that's being had right now is, let's massage it a little and let it come 5 feet from the road instead of, right? Let's go back one slide, somebody. So right now, oh, there it is. One more. Oh, sorry. Back there. Right now, you see the big blue circle, the big space in between right there, that line, the orange line to the blue line on each side? Currently, you can't put an open house sign there, and you currently can't put a Little League sign there or a mattress sale sign there. The conversation that's being had right now and people are having is saying, well, what if we go 5 feet from the road? And the minute we do that, the minute we say, let's go 5 feet from the curb, we are saying for open house signs, let's do that. Well, we're doing that for everybody.
Sure.
So
why not?
It will happen.
Why
it will
not?
happen where we will have all of those signs on Smith Enke.
Right.
Because once we allow, they'll all start doing it. Right? So that's what I'm trying to convey, is right now it's not allowed.
Sure.
Nobody.
And to address the why not, if you have to space them 10 or 20 feet apart, again, it's a matter of who comes first, who do you prove who comes first, who removes whose sign to get their sign, and it just never stops. And to say that it's not a proliferation of signs is just false. We pick up hundreds and hundreds of signs every single weekend that are illegal. Hundreds and hundreds. So, and that's with it being illegal. Imagine if it's illegal, what will happen?
Right.
And people don't. And we showed you signs today that whereas most of our real estate agents, others, are very professional, we showed you real estate signs in the middle of the road and in sidewalks. Those, I don't know who they were, but that's not what needs to happen.
They're obviously breaking the law anyways.
They are, but the whole point is we're trying to find a compromise solution to resolve it. And I do have a suggestion to make to the council, if I may. We need to vet this a little bit more, but I had a thought about maybe we find a caveat that you can issue a permit a year at a time at a fair nominal price that people like professional people would use who would follow rules, and likely those people who just want to stick up, buy a mattress or we buy homes would probably not go through the process and pay that fee. Therefore, we'd have a way of excluding. Would you allow us a chance to vet that with our attorneys and see if we can bring back some concepts with regard to that.
Possibility of doing it, I'm sorry, the possibility of doing it works, but I was speaking to someone in Gilbert that recently dealt with this issue, and I think that was something that they decided they would look into and try, and it became that if you're going to allow it in the right of way, you have to allow it for all, and the actual license part is not allowed. Because you're picking and choose. People are paying for the right there, but we can look into it. I'm happy to look
Let
into
us
it.
look into it. There might be a solution in there that can work with our professional people who might be willing to pay a little bit annually, because then if they don't, we can pull their permit and they lose their right if they don't, because then we know who they are and they're registered or whatever. I don't know the details, but I'd just like to explore that a little bit further and come back.
Yeah, that does make sense. I actually like that a lot. Just real quick, one more thing you were saying about the signs going through the meadows. At the current moment, with the current code, they can't put it on the right-of-way, but they can through the meadows. So you can still have signs throughout the entire city of Maricopa as long as it's not in city right-of-way. And that's what we're asking for, is a little bit of leeway. You're going to get the signs everywhere, whoever wants to put them, because they can. So those of us that are going to be highly affected by the right-of-way, I would really, really like you guys to look into that. I really appreciate your advice on that. That was actually probably the best that I've heard all night. So
The good news is in the HOAs do a really good job of pulling down the mattress sales and the satellite sales and all of those. The HOAs will pull those down themselves, and they allow for the garage sale and the yard sale and those. But I was really talking about the right-of-way is the biggest thing, in the city right-of-way. And what we allow has a impact on everybody. So, I would love to have 20 open house signs for every realtor, and then make that the rule. But you know what's going to happen after that? The realtor is going to come and put 20 on the house that's 10 feet away from the road. They're going to put 20 signs or 10 signs up, or the house that's 100 feet away from the road. They're still going to put 20 signs up, and so it's not a catch-22, I don't know what it is. It's a conundrum wrapped in a riddle, right? And when you look at it, you have to deal with every single thing that's going to come down the road. And, it's nonstop, and it's the code enforcement team. If you go out with them on a Monday morning, you'll understand it. And it's nonstop. The signs are just keep coming and coming. And we're not trying to hurt a business by saying don't have the signs. We're not trying to lower property values. We want property values to go up. But for every house that's being sold, there's hundreds of houses that aren't being sold that don't want any signs, right? So yeah, the one guy selling his house wants 10 signs up, but the hundreds of people that are not selling their house don't want any signs up. So when you look at it, the people of Maricopa are not storming this room saying, we want all the signs out there. There's 10 people here, and I got 2 emails, and I think it's from people that are already here. So when you look at it, there's a balance that has to be met. And we'll meet that balance. We'll come back and we'll talk more about it. I love the idea of trying to figure out a way where we can charge for the signs and see if that's allowed, if it's professional or not, or things like that. But we'll go there over time.
So I would like to go back to Tina's thought on the non-residential use in a residential zone. If we can state that the directional signs have to be leading you to a house, and that eliminates businesses outside of the residential zone from plattering all kinds of directional signs to their businesses, I would certainly like to consider that. Bob, yeah?
content based on current standing law. I see your point, and it would be a great solution to it, but I'm not totally sure legally we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, and you talk about signs on 347, they pop up constantly, they're popping up, you know, and some people, I mean, I got phone calls saying this past week, saying, how come I can't have my open house sign on the 347? And I said, well, it's against code, you know, sorry, you can't do it. And they're like, well, there's one for a directional to Santa's workshop that's being taken photos, and it's chained to the sign for the city of Maricopa, right? So there's that one there, why can't mine be right next to it? And it's like, well, technically it could. If we're going to allow that one, we have to allow that one. So, yeah, it's a mess.
So basically, our prior conversation on directional signs, allowing for enough to get you to the house, as long as there's a change in direction, is now a void conversation. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, we'll just have to, I mean, we'll come back to you with.
Okay.
Obviously.
That's where I'm thinking is we need to relook at everything.
Because we've
Okay.
tried with the residential zone for residential use, residential zone for non-residential use. That's what those things are really getting at.
Right.
But we understand there's a balance between the person putting the sign up, the code enforcement officers, and obviously what's legal. So we'll explore some ideas and
Okay.
come back.
Okay, so that takes care of number of signs. You're going to explore some ideas and what can be controlled and identified. There was the parking lot item that we put for signs and where they will be located. Councilmember Marsh brought this up. Wes, you alluded to the fact that you're trying to improve the process for where these signs are stored, and did I hear that correctly? Okay.
Yeah, and if I may, Madam Mayor,
Yes.
if the council would ultimately put into the code that a phone number and name is required, then it's easy to make an effort to call people.
Yeah.
But the code also ought to say if there is no number or whatever and they're in violation of code, we have the right to throw it away.
Yep.
You know?
Right.
I like that idea.
So we'll come back with some of those thoughts. And again, if we can explore this permit option, that could eliminate a lot of these other discussions in their entirety, because the permit would grant certain rights where other things, now, if they want to buy a permit, then they agree to the rules and all too. But I find that a lot of these fly-by-night things that just pop up probably won't come in and do that. And if we spot them, we then have the right to pick them up and toss them.
I like that. And for those signs, in terms of cost efficiency, for those signs that professionals already have, they could just simply place a decal on the back of their sign that has the name and number. It can be as simple as that, correct?
Sure.
Okay. All right, so that takes care of audience and the number of signs, takes care of looking at whether we can require a license or a permit, excuse me, and adding a name and phone to help control.
And council, with the holidays upon us, we'll probably hit this again in earnest first of the year and
Perfect.
do our research and return a report.
Perfect. May I go back to one comment that Councilmember Ghetto brought up? In listening to some of the folks speak and your question regarding sun up to sundown, I do wonder if having a time frame other than when the sun goes down actually makes sense. So could you include that as well as something to look at? Okay.
Might be 1 hour after the event is over or something like that.
Yeah. And then I definitely appreciated the education portions of the conversation and the need for either a cheat sheet or a pamphlet that makes it easy with possibly some simple photos in it. And then we also left on the parking lot the concept to look into repeat offenders. So something else to look at. I think I captured any of the empty holes. Okay, any unanswered questions?
Thank you.
Okay, so is that good? All right, perfect. Given that, this session is closed.